Hey everybody, we are Martin, Robert, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hey, welcome back to Snakes and Otters. Thanks for being here with us every week. Hey, be sure to spread the word on your own social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We're on Twitter at Snakes and Otters. You can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com. So hey, I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
So guys, here we are. It's episode 28, the second episode of our Rome series.
Whoa!
Well, I was wondering if you were going to do that. If you didn't,
we all have very great friends in Rome.
Yes, we do.
That's right.
So, last time we talked, focused on the Republic period. So obviously, the next thing to do is focus on the Empire period. That period, mostly when we talk Empire, we're talking about the Empire in the West.
Yes.
That entity that was so influential in Western civilization. So you're talking from, 14 BC to 475 AD, somewhere in that ish, roughly.
For the purposes of our discussion here, we're going up until about 313, because once it becomes Christianized, that's the next episode.
Next episode.
That's right.
Well, I think there's legitimate overlap there, because once Christianity becomes part of the empire legally, there's lots of back and forth. That becomes the new cultural question. So
that's right, and that's
for the empire itself.
That's right, because they try to figure out who the heck are we, because they were very pagan before that.
Yes,
usually tolerant, but we'll keep going.
So I think it's a little bit valuable here to just very quickly, not spend a lot of time on it, but just talk about that transition from the Republic to the Empire. Of course, it starts with the man who crossed the Rubicon, Julius Caesar. And then the Ides of March, 44 BC, he's murdered in the Senate. The perpetrators flee, Cassius, Brutus, and the rest. And Rome comes under the sway of what's called the Second Triumvirate. Mm-hmm. And unlike the First Triumvirate, which was clandestine, this one's openly acknowledged in law by the Senate. And it's Octavius, the adopted son, relative, whatever. Heir of Julius Caesar. His right-hand man, Mark Antony. And a reliable soldier in Lepidus. They come to defeat the assassins at the Battle of Philippi and share the Roman Empire now, or the Roman Republic, between the three of them. But that wasn't going to last.
No. Yeah, the Senate made a big mistake in many ways, because by giving these guys semi-unlimited dictatorial powers, because they just done it, because Julius Caesar was named Imperator for life. So basically, at that point, even though he didn't live much longer after that because they killed him, they had already crossed their own Rubicon in many ways. They'd already decided, we like this one guy in charge thing if he's the right guy. So...
isn't that the eternal question? The one right guy.
That's right.
The definition of who the right guy is...
That's exactly it.
Is always the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They thought Julius Caesar was. And there's some reasoning behind that.
But eventually... the three triumvirs have a falling out. Lepidus is sidelined to North Africa, right?
Right, yeah. We don't even remember him. I mean, if you study it, we know his name, but beyond that, he's the third
He was
guy.
never in a movie.
No, that's right. Not that I'm aware of. That's right.
I mean, how are we going to remember him?
Even Crassus, in the first triumvirate, the third guy whose name we often remember, he was Laurence Olivier in Spartacus, for goodness sakes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
He's had his moment.
But eventually... very famously, Anthony becomes embroiled with the Queen of Egypt.
Oh, yes.
Cleopatra.
She who is brought in a carpet, totally nude, and rolled out in front of Caesar. Oh, yes. She's quite the...
so she moves right...
colorful personage.
Yeah, right from Caesar to Antony. They even have children together.
That's right.
3 of them, right?
I believe so. That's exactly right. And Caesar already having had a son, illegitimate, but he claimed him... publicly in Rome, which was a scandal in and of itself.
Yeah.
Caesarian.
Yeah. But Octavius takes advantage and says, hey, Rome, you don't really want this Egyptian person
I was going to say, you're trying to find the right words to phrase this well, because it was a scandal of the First Order.
Yeah,
and he was saying this guy is not Roman. He's letting this babe of Egypt lead him around by the nose or something else.
She's going to be the queen of Rome.
That's right. You don't want her because you met her once before and you didn't like her then. Yeah. Because she's not Roman at all. She's very Eastern.
Yeah. And so Octavian uses that to his advantage. He defeats the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium.
A naval battle, actually.
A naval battle, and they both commit suicide, and Octavius rules the world.
That's right.
He is it. Takes the name Augustus.
That's right, because he's so cool.
And that is the start.
That's right. Because
the Roman Empire.
The Senate's already realized, well, this one guy in charge, we kind of already gave that away, didn't we? And there's no taking it back.
Yeah.
Yes, once you give power to someone else, it's very difficult to take it back.
That's right, and Octavius knew that.
You know, he was very mindful, though, of the form of the Republic.
Yes.
Kind of keeping a little bit of the paint on, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely.
He redid the plumbing, but he left the paint in place.
It's a good aphorism.
He becomes known as princeps. He does not take the titles of dictator or anything
imperator
like that.
or any of that stuff. That's right. It's a much more reduced imagery.
But basically what he says goes. Mm-hmm. And he keeps a pretty tight circle with his family. Mm-hmm. And it's the beginning of the Julio-Claudians.
That's right. Well, part of the thing is, too, it's like when we talked about Voltaire, one of the reasons he had such a reputation, because he lived so darn long. The same thing with Octavian or Augustus.
He was young.
He was very young when he took over, and he lived a long time, and he has plenty of time to put his people in the right places. And they were also still in this period of unprecedented growth outward. They, for a generation before, they annexed Gaul, which had not been able to have been done. Thanks to Octavian himself, they get Egypt and all that stuff that went with it. So now we actually have a real empire on the map, whereas before it was kind of a loose association. We talked a little bit about that in the show prep. Client states. That kind of gets subsumed as they go along. They don't do much. They don't do much more.
Egypt is outright annexed.
That's right.
Most of the rest of the Middle East remains nominally separate nations, not provinces. But
right. But
clients definitely they remain client states to the empire.
As I said earlier, the marble curtain.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like the Soviets and the Eastern Bloc.
Right.
Yeah. Very much the same kind of thing. So, out of that history, then, where do we go from here? So, guys, a few months ago, I read Adrian Goldsworthy's Pax Romana, that term, Roman peace. The empire is thought to have brought peace generally to Europe. So I wanted to kick that to you and just say, what do you think? Is that real? Was the Pax Romana real? Was it a fiction that Rome promoted? What do you think?
Well, I think there's three different ways to look at this.
Yeah.
Because we talked about two in the show prep, but so it's definitely a yes and a no in the sense that yes, there is a peace because when you come in and there's no active conflict against you, that's peace. That's a lack of war. That doesn't mean everybody's happy about you being there, but also no, because sometimes when you create peace by wiping everybody out or creating such a totalitarian atmosphere that everybody's so scared of you that ultimately they are going to rise up.
Well, crucifixion had a lot to do with that too.
Yes.
Yes.
Crucifixion. Yes.
One cross each. Right on the left.
So it's definitely a yes and a no, but that's true of all totalitarianism. Really, an empire by definition is a totalitarian in the sense that he has total control. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative. It just always works out that way. Divine right kings, you could say, were totalitarians because they ruled what they said went.
It was absolutism.
Yes. But also this third thing is, it's interesting when we talk about the Pax Romana, was it truly a peace, or was it simply trying to overwrite what they found with their own culture? Sometimes taking bits of it that pre-existed, as we said earlier, that's how they got all their gods. They took up what they liked, discarded the rest. So, to me, I've always looked at Pax Romana not so much as a lack of conflict, as the Romanizing of the world that they knew.
I think it's that, and it's also that in reverse, because Rome brought with it all the good things it had, like roads and
Plumbing.
The aqueducts. That's right. We could do the whole Monty Python sketch. What did the Romans ever do for us? But all that's very true. They brought all this stuff with them, but they also recognized, and here's their genius. Here's that universal stuff. One of the reasons why this, as empires go, is really so good, is they did not impose this. They brought this stuff with them that everybody loves, but they let them continue their own religion, which they were smart. They recognized, we'll never convert them to ours. We'll just subsume them into us. Their customs, all these things, their family structures, none of that's mandated. You just bring that in. You become Roman. That supreme right of Roman citizenship is available to you, but there are certain expectations that come with that.
Yes. Now, and those expectations are the ones that directly bring Rome into conflict with the Jews, ultimately leading to the massacre at Masada,
right?
As well as the Christian persecutions up until, and actually past Constantine, because as they go back and forth, the emperors between Christianity being legal and not, there's persecutions. So there is religious persecution, but it's generally focused at the one group, mainly because they won't buy into.
That's right. That's the system that Rome is trying to put out,
and that's what I was talking about with the Romanizing. The Jews and the Christians would not be Romanized.
That's right. They were one of the few, because as a general rule, being Romanized is a good thing. It brings you lots of stuff. Your standard of living goes way up. You're also protected. Now you have to pay taxes on that. You know, Rome brings their legions, but the legions, as we've said, are very good at keeping order.
And part of the deal with a province is, we're here, but you now have the opportunity to be a part of the legions.
Yes.
The barbarian, what they would call a barbarian parts of eventually came to dominate the Roman military.
That's correct.
In the later period,
we're getting ahead of ourselves.
The entire Roman military was barbarian.
Right. Well, it's also a path to power for these generally uneducated, undisciplined barbarian tribes. You've got a way to make something, because you see all this great stuff that the industry and the trade that Rome provides can bring to you, things you could never find. I mean, where can you're in Gaul, and all of a sudden you're getting goods from Egypt and from North Africa, and the trade that's put forward.
Yeah, Roman wine vessels are found as far away as Britain.
Right.
And the fact that they build their roads, some of which are actually still usable even today, that's a big deal. Yeah. So Rome is not just a military powerhouse. That's, as they said in Star Trek, here we go.
Not in the beginning.
Well, that's correct.
It certainly spreads through the power of the military.
That's right.
But that's, I think, a function of necessity. Because otherwise you can't spread. Because you're going to come into conflict with the people you're trying to Romanize.
Conquest is easy, control is not.
Yes.
And Rome does a very good job of control. They actually do a good job
for as long as they can.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Because as a general rule, at the period that we're talking about, the Pax Romana you're trying to talk about here, there's only two frontiers, eventually, that are hostile. There's the Germania, on the other side of the Rhine. And then there's Persia, which is its own issue, in the Far East. But it existed long before Rome did.
Right. Persia is you could almost say Persia was, and some would say still is, the eternal enemy, or opposite number, if you want to talk about enemies, of the West.
That's right.
Because who's Persia today?
It's Iran. Iraq, all that area.
So,
yeah. So it is a conundrum a bit here that, is it real? In one sense, sure.
Absolutely.
Internally, for the most part, again, we talked about this, during this empire period, you can travel from southern Britain to the Middle East on Roman roads in relative safety.
you cannot underestimate the value of
You
that.
can take goods back and forth. All
To me,
across
that
there.
answers your question the best that we can put it in a succinct fashion.
Relative is the key point there.
Yeah,
that's
I
correct.
mean, we talk about going from, say, New York to San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that in relative safety.
Mm-hmm.
We don't expect anybody's going to rob us along the way or kill us, although that certainly does happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, I would still hazard a guess, though, that happened more often then than it does now. So, relative to the time.
Right. And
nobody traveled alone, let's put it that way.
Banditry was at a minimum. But again, relative, because it's not a period that's absent of conflict, as you talked about. There are wars at the borders, at the fringes.
That's right. Yeah, and
there's Roman civil wars, which
Yes.
are super unpleasant.
that's usually brief, and that's usually regarding a transfer of power between between regimes. I mean, you've got the year of the three emperors, for goodness sakes, where they weren't satisfied with any of them, and it's finally somebody comes in.
Yeah, and there's a year of the 5 emperors, a year of the 6 emperors.
That's right.
So there are periods through here, every 100 years or so, where there's huge internal civil conflict.
Well, their system of succession was different.
Yeah.
It's not primogeniture. It's almost never from generation to generation. That's actually the exception. It's who's got the political clout to take the crown.
Most successful military commander. In all
Usually that's
cases.
that.
Who has the military clout to take the
That's
crown.
correct, because it's become very much a military.
Yeah, many of the emperors were declared by their legions
Right.
that
Yes.
they were commanding.
And I'm sure that was also a promise. All right, guys, I want to be emperor. You guys can help. It'll go really well for you as well as me.
Well, they're usually already proven that this guy will always back us. He's
Yes.
always got us. So
and
that's the
that was
loyalty
a regular,
he inspires.
Yeah, a regular feature, a donative. When you got back to Rome, hand out money to the legions that backed you.
And this is a really good point about when you're talking about always wars on the borders. One of the things we forget about wars prior to mid 1800s, late 1800s, is that when you went to war, often your officers were responsible for the training and arming of the soldiers. So in this case, often the commander of the legions is as well. One of the ways that they got paid was in looting.
That's correct.
So when you sacked a city, hopefully they would surrender.
Yeah.
Because if you surrender, it doesn't go nearly as hard on you.
Right.
Yeah, you're not usually made an example out of.
Exactly.
That's right.
But if you get sacked, there's burning, raping, and pillaging way bad. And so there's always that. And this is one of the reasons why the Pax Romana kept expanding. And I think this is partially because at its core, the system is designed around a very small geographical area, the Italy Mediterranean area, right? But to support all the things that they did, the lifestyle, all of the public works in Rome. If you've ever been to Rome, the aqueducts still stand, and some of them are still in use, all right? And the buildings that they built, they're still there. They built big, they built to last. This stuff cost money. And you didn't have any money in Rome because you've already spent it. That's why you're out conquering. And you see it in empires all the time. They have to expand or they're going to die. And so Pax Romana, in a way, you could say maybe this is, just as you said that traveling in relative safety is proof that it is true, perhaps this is proof that it is not. Because if you have to constantly expand and take over, which you have to do at the point of the sword, at least to some degree, not very many places you're going to see the Romans coming and say, hey, this is a great thing. Everybody's going to resist. So Pax Romana is both true and not true. It's true in the sense that once
you're there,
if you're there long enough, you get stability.
right.
But there's a lot of instability before you get there.
Right. And that's really, I think, what it means is you stabilized an area. And Goldsworthy talks about that kind of in
Romanizing.
His conclusion is, undoubtedly there was a major revolt early on in Britannia. The famous Boudica.
Right.
But after 66 AD,
That's right.
there are no further rebellions in Britain.
That's right. It
No,
is.
they walled off those crazy Scotsmen.
That's right. Yeah. Adrian and
They
all
walled
that.
off the people that paint themselves blue, and the rest of Britain was a successful Roman client state.
That's right. One of the most successful. Yeah.
Enjoyed their trade goods with the rest of Rome,
and was proud of that too.
Yeah.
They were successfully Romanized.
I think that's partially because of the type of situation. They're an island.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot easier to pacify or Romanize them because they're not going to be invading the continent. Right?
Right.
You know, you don't necessarily have to leave a huge legion presence there for whatever reason. It could have gone that way, but for whatever reason it didn't. And I think being an island nation helped with that. They were a little bit more isolated. It was almost like they were closer to Rome, even though they were one of the farthest provinces. Because the Pax Romana is stronger the closer you get to Italy.
That's right. Well, one of the things that Rome was, one of the many things that it was such a genius about, is how it would go to those areas out on the fringes. And they had a grand strategy, and I'll give you a book by Edward Luttwak, The Grand Strategy of the Roman Empire. And it talks about this very period, and it says that how Rome, he puts forth that this was deliberate. Mm-hmm. That it was, in other words, it was an intentional strategy that they kept for 300 years. I don't buy that. I think it's
pretty far-reaching.
Pretty far-fetched. If you read it, you'll see that it doesn't quite pull that off. But he also, because they discover a system that works.
Yes,
it's kind of de facto that it works that way. But when they go into an area, they will subsume all the people into their legionary, into their civil government. And they will bring their own customs with them.
Well, yes, because the legions, they stayed.
That's correct.
They married.
That's right.
That's one of the ways that the Pax Romana was spread.
That's right.
They spread through marriage.
That's right. And they would. That's how they would stay there. And over generations, the local people would be thoroughly Romanized, and they would then subsist. The local legionaries would be generational. They'd be there forever. That's why you've got forts and palisades in certain areas. But the further you go, eventually they reach an end. You can only go so far. That's why at the Rhine River you're kind of stuck. You can't really go across, even though they traded with them all the time. In fact, there was even a large battle on the Rhine that the Romans lost early on because the Rhine froze over one evening, and they all came across, and it kind of goes with that.
So, gentlemen,
this was a good place to stop. But you're right.
So today we have a different kind of bourbon than we've had in the past. We like to go back to our favorites a lot. So a while back, I heard about this thing called Bottled and Bond. It is bourbon that was bottled and bonded as a certain quality by the U.S. government. The government actually supervised it. And the reason, if you're not familiar with the term, is that there was a time, even though it breaks my heart to hear it, people were selling bourbon that didn't have a whole lot of bourbon in it.
Say it isn't so, sir.
Especially saloons that were farther away from Kentucky. Where people knew their bourbon. Yes. Yeah, where people knew their bourbon would adulterate the liquids they sold. I read in one place or heard about it in one place that sometimes they would mix the tobacco spit from the spittoon because it's a good dark color.
Oh, joy!
And it you never knew what was in it, and this became such a big deal that the government imposed standards. And if you wanted to sell bourbon, you needed to have the bond.
The bond meant it was actually the real thing.
Yes, and it had to meet certain standards in how it was made, how long it was stored in the oak casks. I think the minimum is 2 years. Most common for the bond is 4. I got us a bottle of 6-year Heaven Hill old style bourbon, and it's 100 proof, so it's a little bit higher alcohol content than probably most of the ones we try, and. It's not bad. For it was only $12. For $12 bourbon, it's really way better than I thought it was going to be.
It's got a little bite to it.
Yeah.
But I like that.
It's got a little bit of bite, but it still has a great warmth that lasts. Mm-hmm. Not unlike the warmth that you get with the Angel's Envy that you keep in your gullet, for lack of a better term. Not as smooth.
Not as smooth as Angel's Envy.
It's not intended
but that
to be,
bite can be good sometimes.
Absolutely.
I would be comfortable having this straight up. Or as a mixing bourbon, $12. It's okay if you mix that.
We sometimes have it neat. Most of the time, it's on ice. Whereas we rarely mix on occasion if we're feeling a little funny with that. But most of the time, it's just straight with ice.
Funny in the bad way.
Correct. That's right. That's right.
So yes, this is Not bad. Now, and of course, Heaven Hill chose that because we have the family tie. Because your mom, wasn't she work at Heaven Hill?
Barton's.
Barton's.
Sorry, wrong one. How did you not know that? They're both in the same place.
Yeah, both down there. So.
One's on one side of the city, the other's on the other.
Okay, then maybe that's what I was thinking. Of course, the bad thing is Heaven Hill is where we've had some fires.
They have, yes.
Late.
They actually lost some of their stuff. That's been actually more than a few years ago, though.
They had one recently, didn't they?
They did. They've had a couple. The big one was where they lost a couple warehouses.
Well, they've had some collapse and
that's correct.
Barrels into the river or something, didn't they?
That's right. They've
some happy fish.
Well, they've actually
couldn't swim a straight line if their lives depended on it.
They've built some new storage houses on the north side of Bardstown. So they can kind of diversify their stuff. They realize we shouldn't have all this flammable stuff so close together when we have lots of options to do otherwise. So they've done that.
Shouldn't store the fireworks in the same building.
Of course not.
Like
Silly. Gunpowder belongs on the somewhere else. That sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So anyways, that's our bourbon for today. And we do recommend it. I think bottled and bond, if you can find it. It's an inexpensive option, but it's not bad. I'm very pleased.
Very much so. You did well, sir.
So, guys, I'm going to circle you back here a little bit because it's Goldsworthy's ending is, yes, it's real because there's just no way to know, in the absence of Rome, what would the West have been like. There's no revolts in Britain. There's also no tribal warfare in Britain. After being Romanized.
Well, that's right. Well, Gaul's the same way.
Exactly.
All those areas were, how do you not say Pax Romana is here? Because they're not. People are not fighting against each other.
Right. Again, I think of it less as
if it happens, they get squashed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think it's less that they have brought peace, so much as they have brought a different culture.
That's it.
That's
stability.
The stability comes through the different culture that they've imposed.
Yeah. And granted, it was imposed at the point of the sword,
but it's good
by
though.
threat.
It benefits the people. There's a lot of advantages to being Roman. You get all this good stuff. Your standard of living goes way out the roof.
Eventually, because I'm willing to bet that initially, there's a lot of outflow economically from territories that are...
That's correct, because you have to kind of stabilize get used to the whole paying taxes business.
Well, not only that, usually all of your wealth is, or a good portion of it is taken back to Rome.
At the conquest, that's correct.
Well, I think a lot of it is going to go even when it's not a straight conquest.
Right, but
that's the whole point.
But you put in place an economic engine and a trade engine that generates wealth both for
they
Rome
tie it into
and
the
for the
world.
local people too, because you have to have an incentive in order to keep doing this.
But, this is a great example. This is 2,000 years old. That one of the ways you bring peace is through greater economic ties.
That's right.
Europe learned it, but from the Romans, and then forgot
it. That's right, because they fractured into pieces. And
all of the cultures. It's kind of maybe this is a bad example. It's kind of like Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. You had all those little countries that made up Yugoslavia.
Right.
They were at peace, but they were still separate cultures.
They were, and they still didn't like each other.
And when Rome fell eventually, and it's not so much that it fell, it just withdrew, it shrank.
Right.
And that's really more than what, it was pushed, the barbarians, primarily the Germans and the Slavic people that came from the East, the Goths.
Yeah.
All of those, when they're coming in, it's the Pax Romana in reverse, in the sense that they're expanding.
Right.
At Rome's expense.
And they're bringing in their culture.
But
they're adopting Rome too.
But they are adopting Rome too.
That's part of why they were so successful is
that's why they stuck
around. They know Roman military everything because they're the ones that have been serving in the Rome. They are the Roman military.
That's exactly right. Well, the Visigoths basically rule Spain for how long? And they consider themselves the successor to the empire. Because they know how to do this. They're learned pretty well from the Romans, and they just kind of set up their own shop, and they use the same structure and methodology that the Romans did.
And that's what the Goths did in Italy. Odoacer, as he dispatches Orestes and Romulus Augustulus in 475.
Oh, very good, sir.
Very good. It's hard to say.
I am bowing to you, sir. You can't see this on the podcast.
He sends the imperial vestments to the Eastern Emperor and says, hey, I'll be your client. And that's the fall of Rome in the West.
Yeah.
But I think where you might be trying to go with this about the Pax Romana, and is it real or not? At least to me, is it real in the sense? What's important here is it real in the sense that it has a lasting effect? Because we've talked about before, how much do we owe to Rome? We owe a lot.
Absolutely.
A lot.
But why? Why do we owe a lot? I think part of it is it was Rome that gathered up all of these little scattered villages and tribes. And this is how they did it in Italy when they became a republic.
That's right.
They gathered up all of these little, savages, basically, early on. And, as relationships are formed, there becomes somewhat of a commonality to everyone's cultural experience. Now, a lot of that does get lost over time because, there's not the instant communication that we have today.
Right.
But obviously, they were successful enough to be remembered, not just, as the great big Roman Empire, but I think culturally, because again, you see remnants of what it means to be Roman, the idea of people having a say in their own governing, as at a very minimum. Representatives, representative democracy. We get that from Rome, not from Greece.
Right.
Now, granted, it took a long time before that became a real thing again.
Sure.
But I think that cultural commonality is probably why they. I would ultimately say there's a Pax Romana. Excuse me. Why they were successful, because it wasn't just a smash and grab. It wasn't a political smash and grab. It wasn't a get in, get whatever we can, do all the raping and pillaging that we can. They were spreading what they saw as the ultimate good, which was their own civilization.
Their own culture.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because the Dark Ages,
Really weren't that dark.
Yeah, well, yeah, they weren't.
But it's called that for a reason.
Because every single political entity that there was tried to lay claim to the Roman legacy. They wanted that. They saw that as the ideal. We want to be like Rome. And Rome doesn't exist anymore, but we're going to be that for this local area.
Sure.
Clovis does it. Many other places, they try to put their own, they try to claim that. There's value in that. I remember the line from that great movie of ours that we love so much, Gladiator, Ridley Scott. You remember when Maximus is in the tent talking with Marcus Aurelius, he says, I've seen much of the world. It is dark and cruel. Rome is the light.
Yes.
And that's
Dark Ages because the light of Rome went out.
That's it. That's exactly right.
But it's only in comparison. And we can get into that later.
Yeah,
but I mean,
that might be another episode completely. We've never thought about doing one of those.
But yeah, it's I'd say it's real, but not necessarily the way a lot of people might think of it.
Right. And I think that's a lot of Goldsworthy's conclusion here is, I'm not trying to excuse, he doesn't try to excuse the way they got there. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's at the point of a sword. It's
on the cross.
Conform or
on
die.
the cross, yes.
Yeah.
But there's no way to know what the alternative might have been. Again, tribal warfare all throughout Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, all the way to the Rhine.
I think we know what it would have been. We don't know how it would play out.
Yeah.
Right.
And there is conflict during this entire period. Again, conflict on the borders, the Roman civil wars, but generally inside the empire, you are safe.
Because it is, shall we use the term civilized, meaning civis, meaning city, meaning state.
Yeah.
You have that ability with the Pax Romana. And the fact that it's spread all over the Mediterranean and has a legacy afterwards, in many respects, to the extent that civilization was seen as desirable versus anarchy, localized, we owe to Rome.
Right, and that's what I was talking about as far as laying that groundwork. So even when they were gone, the
we
idea...
all wanted it. It was good.
And I think that was part of what, the success is tied to, is what you were talking about when they became Roman. The people became Roman. Their self-identification changed. They were no longer just from this village here, and we really hate the village that's only half a mile down the road, because half a mile 2,000 years ago was a long way.
Yeah, most people never went outside that in many ways.
Right. You might have gone a couple of miles.
Yeah.
Village probably more than a half mile, but you get my point.
Well, whatever your trading patterns were, they were localized.
Right. And
Generally.
usually your closest neighbor was also your closest enemy.
Right.
Yeah, very much a rival for the same resources.
For the same resources, for the same food, for the same materials, for the same women. I mean, because that's the world it was.
Yeah.
And I really think that Rome changed the identification, taught people they could be more than just members of the village they were born into.
Oh yeah, because I hadn't even thought about that, but you're exactly right. It gives them some aspirations. You can be something. I mean, we know about Pelagius and some of the Britannian Augustine of Canterbury and others like that saw themselves as aspirancies. I will go to Rome. I will. That's where the culture is centered. They would learn there, and then go back to their provinces. This is a little bit later, mostly, but it still holds that everything was seen centralized there. All roads lead there. It's a common phrase, but it really did mean that. Not just the roads, but that's where everybody wanted to go. It was the red hot center.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we're about near the end.
Yes,
but I need to throw this out.
Go ahead.
So we often hear another similar term, and that is the Pax Americana.
Yep.
Now,
Yeah.
I would say that a lot of the things that I laid out about Pax Romana being more about Romanizing, the same thing is true with Pax Americana. It's not about America conquering places where we go. Generally, we try not to stay there for very long. We've been trying to get out of the Middle East for a long time. Each president, each administration keeps trying to want to pull people out, and we keep getting pulled back in.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to get out because generally we don't like to stay those places. We stayed in Europe after the war because we had the Soviets, and now we're there. It shrinks, but it doesn't really grow much. It's just part of what it is. But when you look at the impact we've had on the world, and you go to places like Japan.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Japan, while still being very Japan,
Yes.
is very Americanized.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great melding, a synthesis, hammer and anvil type thing that's created this new, stronger sword, as you were, that puts this, culturally speaking, it's not a bad thing.
A more resilient place all the way around.
Right.
That still retains some of its characteristics, its personality of itself, but it takes a lot of stuff that's great about us.
Well, we learned that from Rome. You take some great stuff that you bring in, you keep what you want, and you keep what you want to keep from what you had, and it becomes something new, and the bonds of relationship again at the national levels, the global levels, are made stronger by that.
Yep.
There's a lesson there.
I mean, it's an amazing thing that I don't think we really value, but I think historians down the road would look at, geez, you bombed a place completely flat, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Japan and Germany were devastated.
Correct.
Carthage level devastation.
Right.
After World War II, yet now they thrive.
And are some of your strongest allies.
And economically and culturally stronger than ever.
Right. And not in a threatening way.
And in 50 years. Or
really less than that.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And
so it's a pretty amazing thing that has been accomplished there, and you're right, it's the military part's important, but it's not a continuous thing, it's more a cultural thing.
Winning the war and winning the peace are two different things.
Yes, yeah.
And is it strong?
We were good at it once, Rome was good at it once.
Right. I don't think we're so good at it anymore.
We're not.
One of the, and maybe this is what led to Rome's downfall ultimately, because it certainly has hurt us.
Right.
One of the things that we used to be very good at was assimilating people who came to this country.
Right.
Now, obviously, there's a mood in the country, whether it's right or wrong. I don't want to get into that.
Yeah, you're right.
That we don't want to assimilate new cultures, which to me is so antithetical to the whole concept of being an American.
It is.
Now on the other hand, I also say, how long do you have to have been? How long does your family have to have been in the country, or been in the Americas, before you can say you're a Native American? How many centuries does it take?
Yeah.
Because some of us in this room have had family that have been here for 300 years.
That's right.
And longer. So how long? Is that long enough? Yeah. Does it require 700 years? So, but the point is, we have always been good up until recently about bringing people in together, making them American. Now we don't want them to come, much less become American.
The melting pot's been replaced with a lot of little small pots and pans on the stove.
Yes.
Ooh, that's a good image.
That is
I've
a
never
great
heard
image.
that before. Yeah.
And I think it's two-way. It's not just,
Yes.
we're not necessarily wanting you to come here. I think when they come here, they're not being encouraged to put aside things and be American.
Right. It's a tough thing to balance because from a respect for the dignity of human person aspect of it, they shouldn't have to give up everything.
No, that's right.
Shouldn't.
Rome had that balance. I mean, when they would
for
go
a time.
in for a time, when it worked well.
And when the Irish came, they were denigrated.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's not like this. We've always been a great melting pot.
No,
but they assimilated eventually. Usually until the next group came along, they became the ones nobody wanted.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they all assimilated, and you still see bits of Irish culture in various towns, especially in, say, Boston, for instance.
Yeah.
You still see German culture in Pennsylvania. You still see some of that, and you obviously see lots of English culture because that's the primary thrust. You'll still see some French culture in Louisiana.
Sure.
Spanish culture you still see in Mexico,
California,
California, not least because they sit on the border with Mexico, but you still see
founded by Spanish immigrants, 200 years ago, 300 years ago.
Far East Asia,
yes,
Vietnamese that have come, Cubans that have come,
well, Japanese into San Francisco. There's lots of this.
That's all become. Again, it was part of that melting pot.
Yeah. Somewhere something did change. And I don't know if it's that they stopped wanting to be American when they got here, or if we stopped wanting them to come here first.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or maybe becoming American is no longer seen as a good thing.
Oh!
That could be it, too. But yeah,
that's a great point.
Or a necessary thing. Yeah. Perhaps a little both.
That could be a topic for
that's another subject,
for either
perhaps
philosophical, for philosophy or historical discussion, either one.
Yeah,
because it's tied up with both. Again, man, there's those eternal questions.
Yeah, because we definitely, I know all three of our position is we would love to see all the small pots and pans on the stove poured back into one melting pot.
Right.
With all the flavors that come with them.
Yeah.
That's right.
You
don't lose yourself. You enhance everything.
Right. Think about a great stew.
That's right.
You can taste
if you
all
take
the
all of those
yeah.
ingredients and you keep them in separate pots, it sucks. I mean, that's not a good meal, right? But you put it all together. That can be a great meal. Personally, I love stew. I think it's one of my favorite meals.
Amen.
Especially when you go to the Rover, you get that Guinness beef stew.
Well, you guys had burgoo tonight.
And we had burgoo, yeah.
That's right.
That's a Kentucky.
That is the quintessential Kentucky stew.
Yeah,
we had that before we recorded tonight.
Yeah. We somewhere along the way, I honestly think, just like Rome, we lost our way when it comes to that part of things. I hope it's not permanent.
Yes, I think the light is still there, and I think it's not out, and I think we can find it.
As long as we're still, a country.
As long as there's guys like us out there explaining all this and touting what is good, I think we'll find our way.
Yeah.
I'm the eternal optimist, but you guys know that.
Yeah. That's good. It's good to be optimistic. So, guys, I think that's pretty good. That was really good stuff. I think you really
fun. That was lots of fun.
Answer the question. So, thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters. New episodes every Friday. Be sure to spread the word on your own social media accounts and follow us and retweet us. Find us on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
And when you share our messages and our podcasts on your social media, let them know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. Just search Snakes and Otters to listen.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Thanks for joining us.
This has been Snakes and Otters. Thanks for letting us into your head. We plan to live there rent-free for a long, long time.